Imagine waking up one morning, scrolling through your phone, and realizing that while everyone around you is shouting into the digital void, announcing their breakfasts, triumphs, heartbreaks, and epiphanies, there are a few who remain completely silent. No posts, no stories, no carefully curated glimpses of their lives. Just quiet profiles, observers in a world of broadcasters. You've probably seen them. That friend who never uploads a selfie. The classmate whose Instagram has only a blank profile picture and a username that feels like a whisper rather than a billboard. The colleague who watches every story but posts nothing themselves. They're there, always there, but almost invisible. In a time where visibility equals existence, their silence is loud. It feels like a paradox. Why would someone choose not to express themselves in the very age that rewards expression with likes, followers, and validation? What are they holding back, and why? At first, their quietness might seem like nothing more than a personal choice, a matter of preference. But if you look closer, their silence reveals something far deeper, something almost unsettling. Because in a world designed to turn every moment into content, to resist posting isn't just a passive act. It's a statement. But what kind of statement? Is it defiance, fear, indifference, or something that goes even deeper, something most people can't articulate even to themselves? Pause and reflect for a moment. Think about your own behavior. How many times have you felt the subtle tug to post? Not because you genuinely wanted to, but because you felt like you should. How many sunsets have been experienced through the lens of a camera before being felt by your own eyes? How many moments have been flattened into pixels for the sake of digital proof? And now imagine doing the opposite, not posting anything. Would people forget you exist? Would your presence start to fade from their mental landscapes? Would the algorithm slowly bury your identity under the avalanche of others' content? Here lies the great question, one that few dare to ask. In a world where everyone is performing, what does it mean to stay silent? Is it a form of rebellion against the pressures of the digital stage? Or is it a symptom of something hidden? Psychological mechanisms, emotional patterns, or philosophical positions that shape how some people interact with the world. This question strikes at the core of something profoundly human. Social media has become the modern agora, the public square, where identities are built, displayed, and judged. To post is to participate. To share is to exist. To remain silent is to stand at the edge of the crowd, unseen. But what if that silence isn't emptiness? What if it's filled with something richer, heavier, more complex than constant self-expression? What if behind the quiet profiles are minds that observe differently, feel more deeply, or hold beliefs that run counter to the current of digital culture? Perhaps their silence is not absence, but presence of another kind. A presence that doesn't need validation to feel real, and yet their silence unnerves us. We ask ourselves, why don't they share? What are they hiding? Because we've been conditioned to equate silence with mystery, mystery with danger. If someone isn't posting, we assume something is off, as if not speaking means something must be wrong. But what if the truth is the other way around? What if the real mystery lies not in their silence, but in our discomfort with it? Consider this. Every like, every post, every story is part of a massive social feedback loop, a loop that thrives on visibility. But the quiet ones, they step outside of it. They don't feed the loop. They don't shape their identities through constant broadcasting. Instead, they watch. They absorb. They exist in the shadows of the algorithm, neither fully inside nor entirely outside. And maybe that's why their silence lingers in your mind, because it poses a question you can't easily shake off. What would happen if you stopped posting too? Would you still feel seen? Would you still feel real? Or would a quiet unease grow inside you, the fear of disappearing? Their silence is not passive. It reflects something psychological, something ancient. The tension between being and being seen, between the self you know internally and the self you project outwardly. In that gap lies the mystery we're about to unfold, because the truth is, the psychology of people who don't post isn't just about social media habits. It touches the deepest layers of identity, perception, fear, freedom, and rebellion. It's about the invisible forces that shape our relationship with the world and with ourselves. And to understand them, we have to go beneath the surface, past the screens, past the filters, into the silent spaces where identity is not performed, but contemplated. Let's step into that silence. To truly understand the silence, you have to peel back layers made of psychology, philosophy, and the invisible architecture of modern culture. Because silence on social media is not simply a lack of content. It is often the result of deep internal forces colliding with external expectations. Beneath the surface of the digital world, something ancient is at work. The human need to be seen, the fear of misrepresentation, the tension between inner truth and outer performance. Think about it. Posting on social media isn't just pressing share. It's an act of presentation, a ritual of selfhood. In a sense, every post is a tiny mask, a carefully sculpted representation of who you want the world to believe you are. Over time, these masks pile up, and a strange thing happens. People begin to believe their masks more than their own reflections. Carl Jung once wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is." On social media, the persona is amplified. Likes, comments, and shares become psychological mirrors, reflecting back curated fragments of identity. But what happens when someone resists putting on that mask altogether? For many of the silent observers, this resistance is not accidental. Some feel an instinctive discomfort with the performance. They sense, perhaps more acutely than others, that to post is to construct a version of themselves that might slowly diverge from their private reality. And once that gap widens, it can be suffocating. Jung also spoke about the shadow, the hidden aspects of ourselves we keep in the dark. For those who refrain from posting, the act of broadcasting may feel like exposing parts of themselves to judgment they're not ready to face. Not because they have something to hide, but because they understand that the crowd does not see with nuance. The digital gaze is sharp, immediate, and often merciless. Then there's Nietzsche, who warned of herd mentality. He believed that most people, unable or unwilling to think for themselves, follow collective patterns without questioning. Social media thrives on this principle. Trends emerge and millions mimic them reflexively. But those who remain silent often stand apart, not necessarily out of arrogance, but out of a refusal to be absorbed by the herd's rhythm. They look at the flood of content and feel something many don't dare to admit: alienation. A quiet sense that the performance isn't real, that the crowd has mistaken noise for meaning. Arthur Schopenhauer might say that social media amplifies the will, that blind, striving force within every human being that craves attention, approval, and more. Always more. For him, life was defined by restless desire, rarely by peace. Posting online is, in this sense, a modern manifestation of that will. Each post is a reaching outward, a subtle cry. Look at me. Validate me. Tell me I exist. But some people are more attuned to the hollowness of that cry. They sense that validation can never truly satisfy. That behind the curtain of likes lies the same restless yearning. And so, rather than participate, they step back. They do not want their sense of self tethered to a fickle digital crowd. Psychologically, the silence can also emerge from hyper-awareness. Some individuals possess heightened self-reflection. They analyze their motives, their words, their image. For them, posting isn't casual. It's fraught with internal debate. Is this authentic? Does this matter? Why am I sharing this? And often, that self-scrutiny leads to paralysis. It's not that they don't want to share. It's that the act of sharing feels weightier, more complex, than the culture allows space for. In Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, he suggests that humans are driven not by pleasure, as Freud thought, or power, as Adler suggested, but by the need for meaning. For some silent observers, the endless stream of superficial content feels meaningless. They withhold not because they have nothing to say, but because what they want to say doesn't fit into the quick, digestible format of digital culture. Their silence is often a protest against trivialization, a refusal to reduce their inner life into captions and emojis. There's also a subtle psychological inversion at play. For many posters, sharing creates identity. For many silent observers, not sharing preserves it. They fear that the more they expose, the less of themselves remains untouched. Their private life becomes a sacred territory, not to be turned into a public spectacle. Philosophically, Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of the gaze, how being looked at by others turns us into objects, making us hyper-aware of ourselves. On social media, this gaze is constant. It's not just one person looking, it's potentially thousands, millions. For some, this gaze triggers exhilaration. For others, it feels like surveillance. The quiet ones often understand the weight of that gaze more acutely. They sense how it can distort, manipulate, and shape them. And they refuse to become spectacles for others' consumption. Society, meanwhile, pressures individuals in subtle ways. Algorithms reward visibility. Cultural narratives glorify sharing as authenticity, even though it often leads to the opposite. The silent individuals find themselves swimming against this current. Their behavior may even trigger suspicion or misunderstanding. Why don't you post? Are you hiding something? As if silence itself is abnormal. But silence is not a glitch. It's a response. A psychological and philosophical reaction to the overwhelming, performative, surveilled world of social media. It emerges from deep currents, self-awareness, resistance to the herd, longing for authenticity, philosophical rebellion, fear of the gaze, or simply a refusal to turn their lives into performance. This hidden problem, then, isn't simply that some people don't post. The problem is that society has normalized performance so thoroughly that silence feels like an anomaly. And that brings us to a deeper, more unsettling reality. When performance becomes the norm, those who do not perform aren't just silent. They become outsiders. They stand at the edges, looking in, aware of dynamics most don't even notice. Their quietness is both shield and mirror. Shield, because it protects them from the noise. Mirror, because it reflects the performative machinery back at those still caught in it. The silence of those who do not post might seem at first glance harmless or even trivial, but its consequences ripple far beyond their individual profiles. It affects how they perceive themselves, how others perceive them, and how they fit or fail to fit within the invisible architecture of digital society. Because when nearly everyone participates in a collective ritual, opting out becomes more than a personal decision. It becomes a social statement. And society always reacts to statements, even silent ones. Consider the subtle ways silence reshapes perception. On social media, visibility equates to relevance. The more someone posts, the more they appear in others' feeds, the more they exist in the collective consciousness. Silence, then, has a strange side effect. It erases. Not literally, of course, but psychologically. You may know someone well in real life, but if they don't post, their digital presence slowly fades from your mental landscape. Algorithms stop surfacing their names. You stop seeing their updates. Eventually, your brain, conditioned to equate online activity with existence, starts to categorize them as less present. And this creates a quiet psychological penalty. People who do not post are often unconsciously excluded from social narratives. Group plans get arranged in comment sections they never see. Trends evolve, inside jokes form, bonds are reinforced publicly, and the silent ones stand outside those walls, not because they don't care, but because the digital world quietly pushes them out of its rhythm. This isn't intentional malice. It's structural. Algorithms reward those who feed them. They are designed to spotlight the loud, not the quiet. The silent individuals don't play by those rules, so they become invisible. Not by choice, but by system. This invisibility can have profound psychological effects. Humans are social creatures. Our sense of identity is built through mirrors, others reflecting us back to ourselves. When someone doesn't post, they receive fewer mirrors. Over time, this can either strengthen their internal sense of self, or, for some, create a creeping feeling of disconnection. Some begin to question, am I being forgotten? Do I still matter in their world? Even if consciously they reject the performative culture, subconsciously they're still human, wired for acknowledgement. Their silence can be both empowering and isolating, depending on how deeply their sense of self is anchored within. There's another layer, how others interpret their silence. In a hyper-connected culture, silence is often misread. A person who doesn't post may be seen as aloof, secretive, or even judgmental. Why doesn't she share anything? What's he hiding? Is she too good for this? The lack of visible performance invites speculation, sometimes even suspicion. People fill the void of silence with their own narratives, often inaccurate ones. Sociologically, this mirrors an ancient phenomenon. In communities built around rituals, those who don't participate are often othered. Their absence from the collective rhythm marks them as different, sometimes even dangerous. Social media is no different. It's just digital. Meanwhile, the silent ones observe. They scroll through stories, posts, announcements, not to participate but to understand, to feel connected from a distance. They become witnesses rather than actors. And over time, witnessing can take a toll. Neuroscientifically, constant exposure to others' curated lives without expressing your own creates an asymmetry. The brain's mirror neurons fire as if you're participating, but emotionally you're not. This can lead to feelings of being on the outside looking in, a strange psychological limbo. You're part of the audience but never the cast. Moreover, this observer role can distort self-image. When you only consume and never share, you constantly compare your unfiltered reality to others' filtered performances. This asymmetry can amplify insecurities, breeding quiet discontent. Even if you intellectually know the highlight reels aren't real, your emotional circuitry reacts as if they are. Some silent individuals manage this tension well. They maintain a strong sense of internal identity, but others struggle. Their silence, initially chosen for authenticity or philosophical reasons, begins to backfire. They feel unseen, misunderstood, or psychologically isolated. There's also a subtler consequence: missed opportunities. In today's world, digital visibility often translates to real-world advantages: networking, job offers, creative collaborations, social capital. By choosing silence, some unintentionally limit their reach. The digital agora does not reward those who stand at its edges, and yet there's a paradox here. While silence can lead to invisibility and misunderstanding, it also gives birth to something rare: clarity. Silent observers often see dynamics that participants are too entangled to notice. They notice how trends form and collapse, how people curate their pain into digestible captions, how identities bend to fit the algorithm's shape. This outsider perspective can foster deep psychological insight. It's why many silent individuals are thinkers, writers, analysts, or simply people who feel more alive in observation than performance. Their distance allows them to perceive patterns that others overlook. But this gift can also become a burden. Seeing through the game doesn't free you from it. It can make participation feel false, yet abstention feel isolating. You hover between two worlds: the noisy stage and the quiet audience, and neither fully claims you. Cognitively, humans crave belonging, but also autonomy. Silence on social media places you at the edge of this duality. Too much posting, and you risk losing your inner voice to the crowd. Too much silence, and you risk being cut off from the communal pulse. This tension can become existential. You begin to wonder, what is the right way to exist in a world where existence itself seems mediated by screens? The unseen consequences of silence, then, are not simply social or algorithmic. They're deeply human. They touch our identity, our relationships, our mental health, and our philosophical sense of belonging. Because in the end, silence online is never just silence. It is a position, a vantage point, a choice that the system does not quite know how to process. And those who make that choice, whether consciously or instinctively, find themselves navigating a landscape that was never built for quiet people. If the silent ones are caught between invisibility and authenticity, if the digital world quietly punishes them for not performing, then the obvious question arises: how does one break free? Not just from posting pressure, but from the entire psychological machinery that turns identity into performance, silence into suspicion, and visibility into currency. Because true rebellion here isn't simply posting more or withdrawing completely. It's something deeper, reclaiming your relationship with visibility and silence on your own terms. Imagine this. One evening, you're holding your phone, staring at that glowing rectangle, and you decide, for the first time, to interrogate the impulse before you act. Why am I posting this? Am I expressing or performing? Would this still matter if no one saw it? This pause is small, but it's radical. It's the moment you step out of the automated current and begin to navigate deliberately. Carl Jung might call this the beginning of individuation, the process of integrating your authentic self with the social masks you wear. Jung believed that real freedom is not found in rejecting the persona entirely, but in becoming conscious of it. When you post with awareness, your mask no longer controls you. You control it. Breaking free begins with understanding that you are not obligated to perform, nor are you obligated to disappear. You can choose when to speak and when to be silent, not out of fear or conformity, but out of sovereignty. For many silent individuals, the first act of rebellion is not to start posting frantically, but to own their silence, to stop apologizing for it, to stop explaining it, to let it exist as a legitimate stance in a world that often mistrusts quiet. There is immense power in saying, "I do not need to broadcast to exist." But rebellion can also take the form of intentional expression. Some choose to post rarely, but meaningfully, treating their words like carved stone rather than passing wind. They post not to join the chorus, but to strike a single, deliberate note. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of becoming a creator of values rather than a follower of them. In the digital age, this means redefining what posting means to you. If you choose to share, it should not be because the herd is sharing, but because it aligns with your personal rhythm. One post born from authenticity has more existential weight than 100 posted from insecurity. Some rebels go further. They strip their digital lives of performance entirely. They use social media like silent gardens, spaces to observe, learn, and reflect, not to display. They reject the unwritten rules that say visibility equals worth. Others find rebellion in hybrid approaches. They may share aspects of their lives, but deliberately withhold the most precious parts. Their silence is selective, strategic, a form of boundary setting in a world that rewards oversharing. Arthur Schopenhauer might admire this restraint. He saw wisdom in detachment from restless desire. To post less is, in a way, to resist the will's endless grasping for attention. It's to say, I will not let the algorithm dictate my identity. This rebellion is not without its challenges. Algorithms may not reward intentional silence. Friends may misinterpret your boundaries. Opportunities might be slower to arrive. But what you gain is far more valuable. Agency. Agency is the ability to decide your digital rhythm without being pulled by invisible forces. Most people believe they're acting freely online, but in reality, they're dancing to the tune of the system, posting, reacting, scrolling, all within a narrow set of expectations. To rebel is to compose your own tune. Consider the story of an artist, a real one, though they prefer anonymity. For years, they refused to post their work online, believing it cheapened their art. Eventually, they began sharing pieces sparingly, without captions, without hashtags, without chasing engagement. The result? A small but fiercely devoted following formed, drawn to the authenticity of the silence between posts. Their rebellion wasn't loud. It was precise. Or take the example of philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard, centuries before social media, who wrote under multiple pseudonyms to explore different facets of truth without attaching his identity to every statement. In a way, he understood the danger of total visibility long before it became digital. His solution was to create distance between the self and the voice, a form of rebellion that allowed thought to breathe without ego dominating it. Psychologically, breaking free involves confronting the fear of invisibility. One of the most insidious effects of social media is the belief that if we're not seen, we cease to matter. This fear drives much of the compulsive posting culture. But what if invisibility is not erasure, but liberation? What if, by stepping back from the digital gaze, you recover parts of yourself that were lost in performance? Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of the gaze suggests that freedom is compromised when we live primarily through others' eyes. Breaking free, then, is reclaiming your sense of self from that gaze. It's recognizing that your existence doesn't need to be constantly proven through pixels. For some, rebellion might even look like silence. But conscious silence. Silence that isn't born of fear or paralysis, but of power. A silence that says, I choose not to participate in this performance, and that is enough. For others, it's carefully choosing what and how they share, ensuring their digital footprints align with their internal compass. The key is not uniformity, but intentionality. Rebellion is not about joining the loudest voices or vanishing into shadows. It's about refusing to let algorithms, trends, or social expectations dictate the rhythm of your self-expression. And when you do this, something unexpected happens. The pressure begins to dissolve. Posting no longer feels like an obligation. Silence no longer feels like exile. You exist between the poles of noise and absence, moving fluidly between them, guided by something far stronger than social pressure, your own philosophy. Imagine, for a moment, stepping out of the digital current entirely. No posts, no stories, no endless self-surveillance. You are not performing. You are not curating. You are not waiting for validation. What remains? At first, there is silence, an unfamiliar silence, heavy and disorienting. The world, so accustomed to your digital echo, seems to forget you. Notifications stop. The dopamine trickles dry. You feel a strange lightness, and then an unease. Without the digital mirror reflecting you back, you come face to face with something raw and unfiltered, yourself. This is the place most avoid. It's the quiet behind the noise, the space where your identity is no longer mediated by others' reactions. Here, you are no longer performing for an invisible audience. You are simply being, and for many, this is where the deepest realization emerges. You were never truly invisible. You were simply looking for your reflection in the wrong place. The psychology of people who don't post isn't merely about preference, personality, or privacy. At its core, it reveals a fundamental truth about human existence in the digital age. We have confused visibility with reality, performance with identity, and silence with absence. When someone chooses silence, not out of fear, but out of clarity, they confront this confusion directly. They peel away the layers of external gaze, algorithmic pressure, and social expectation to discover something ancient and unshakable, the self that exists before the world looks. Carl Jung would call this the integration of the self, the deeper, whole identity that transcends masks and roles. Most people get stuck playing their persona, trapped in an endless cycle of presenting, reacting, and modifying their identities to match the crowd's response. But those who embrace silence or redefine their digital rhythms intentionally often stumble into this deeper territory. They learn that their worth does not increase or decrease with engagement metrics, that their identity isn't sharpened by the gaze of strangers, that their meaning does not need to be broadcasted to be real. Nietzsche once wrote, "Become who you are." It sounds simple, but in the age of performance, it's one of the most radical acts possible. To become who you are means to shed the borrowed voices, the algorithmic nudges, the fear of being unseen, and to step fully into your own existence, whether or not anyone is watching. The ultimate truth is this: the digital world is a stage, but you are not obligated to perform. This doesn't mean disappearing. It means no longer confusing the stage with your life, no longer mistaking applause for meaning, no longer seeking reflection solely through the curated eyes of others. When you realize this, your silence transforms. It's no longer hesitant or defensive. It becomes sovereign, a silence that holds weight, like stillness before a storm. And if you choose to speak again, if you choose to post, it is no longer out of compulsion, but from a place of conscious creation. Your words carry a different energy. They are not cries for recognition. They are expressions of being. Psychologically, this realization dismantles one of the deepest traps of modern identity, the belief that we must constantly prove our existence. From childhood, we are conditioned to seek mirrors in others, to know ourselves through their eyes. Social media is simply the technological amplification of this ancient need. But when the mirror is taken away, or when you deliberately step away from it, you learn to see yourself directly. It is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that freedom comes with the heavy responsibility of defining yourself. Without others telling you who you are, you must face the dizzying open sky of self-determination. Many fear this. The stage, after all, is familiar. It tells you what to be, how to act, when to speak. The silence, however, asks you to decide. For those who don't post, consciously or not, this confrontation happens earlier. Their silence pushes them to define themselves internally rather than externally. And while this can lead to alienation, misunderstanding, or invisibility, it can also lead to something rare: self-possession. They begin to live less like actors and more like authors. They stop checking the audience's reaction after every line. Their life becomes less of a performance, more of a story being written privately, patiently. In this space, silence is not absence. It is presence without spectacle. And this is where the paradox flips. The loudest voices on social media often fade quickly, echoes that rise and disappear with the next trend. But the quiet ones, the observers, the deliberate speakers, their presence lingers differently. They may not flood the feed, but when they do speak, people listen. Not because of algorithmic amplification, but because their words carry weight. Silence teaches you weight. Noise teaches you speed. One builds depth. The other builds reach. And somewhere between the two, every individual must find their truth. The ultimate realization, then, is not that silence is better than speaking, or that posting is inferior to observing. It's that neither silence nor speech should be dictated by fear, pressure, or herd mentality. The real freedom lies in choosing, with clarity, consciousness, and courage, how you will exist in this digital age. Will you be a performer chasing fleeting reflections? Will you be a hermit hiding from every gaze? Or will you be something rarer, a sovereign being, moving between noise and stillness with intention, unmoved by trends, grounded in your own sense of reality? The people who don't post may not have all the answers, but their silence points toward the most profound question of all. Who are you when no one is watching? Because if you can answer that honestly and fully, the stage loses its power over you. The algorithms become background noise. The pressure dissolves. And whether you choose to speak loudly, whisper occasionally, or remain still, you will know that your existence was never contingent on their gaze. It always began with yours.